On some days, usually when it rains, I think about the end of the world. That might sound bleak, but this is actually a defense mechanism. Planning for the worst-case scenario makes the scenario appear less chaotic in my mind, because now I know that even if it happens, I will have already prepared for this eventuality. But planning for the end of the world is trickier than, say, planning for what I will do if I make less money than usual one year, or what I will do if I get sick. Now, when I say the end of the world, I don't mean the end of the world, because there's no planning for that. Just sit back, relax, and let the asteroid strike. By the end of the world, I mean the point in which the climate has changed enough that my current living conditions will be inadequate, even unlivable due to the heat, rising ocean levels, or other conditions caused by the warming of the Earth. It has already begun and has been growing increasingly worse every year. Dangerous conditions due to heat, flooding, environmental degradation, and weather events believed to be caused by the changing climate force more than 20 million people to leave their homes each year. They are often called climate refugees. This is already happening. I live in Philadelphia these days. Although it's not too close to the ocean, that will only help so much. Temperatures will increase to make summers unbearable, and precipitation will increase that will make winters worse. Flooding will increase along Schuylkill River and Delaware River. I can also expect more hurricanes like Sandy and Irene. The good news for me personally is that I don't own, I rent, and I work out of my apartment, so there is nothing keeping me in Philadelphia if things get too hot. Also, I have only lived here for a few years, and it won't break my heart to move somewhere else. However, my circumstances are not universal. Moving is not some cure-all. Not everyone has the money to relocate, and some people do have the money to relocate but no career waiting for them in the location they desire. Not to mention some will simply refuse to move because they have family in the area. Whether someone has a concern about their home that's related to crime, high unemployment, climate change, or anything else, the response, "Why don't you just move?" comes from a place of privilege. For most people, it's just not as simple as that. Some homeowners might be planning for climate change and looking into retiring somewhere more suitable, but if they attempt to put their house on the market after flooding is inevitable and the heat is too great, finding a buyer will be quite the challenge. Furthermore, some will refuse to move because they will still believe, even as the water rises above their feet, that climate change is a conspiracy operated by Big Sun or whatever. Worst of all, moving is only a temporary measure that can only rescue an individual, but will not have any effect on the climate itself. The adverse effect on our climate can only be slowed through radical changes, such as switching to renewable energy sources, but those decisions are not made by us. Even recent mandates do not seem to go far enough. That means that as impractical as I just said it was, moving somewhere less dangerous as things get bad might be the only option that I have, and that many others have as well. I've lived in other nations before, but never for more than a year, and I'm at an age where starting over in, say, the Netherlands or something is not an option, in addition to all the legal and bureaucratic challenges of immigration. My options are exclusive to the United States. Also, I'm getting too old to keep starting over even in other parts of my own nation, so wherever I choose to be is going to have to be permanent. I don't want to have to get used to a new city when I'm a senior citizen. I'm approaching 40, and I can already sense myself getting set in my ways. I've been reading a lot of articles, plus the book How to Prepare for Climate Change, and it looks as if choosing where to escape depends on a wide array of criteria. Nowhere is climate-proof. There are simply degrees of danger. First, I will need to search for a city that is not particularly hot right now, because it's only going to get hotter. Projections are that the United States will be between 5 degrees to 6 degrees hotter on average in approximately 30 years, if the change in temperature that we are already seeing continues. That 6 degrees change is more likely to be confined to the middle of the US, meaning from Tennessee to Nevada. I lived near Las Vegas once upon a time. It was too hot for me then, and it will be simply unbearable soon. I lived in Austin, Texas years back, and while I loved the food and the scene, I can't imagine going back. I can't select a city that I know is too hot, especially a city in Texas, because their utilities have big problems, and their government is not particularly keen on fixing them. For years I dreamed of living in Southern California. Hollywood, Disneyland, great food and excitement, but based on how hot the summers are there right now, I think this dream will go unfulfilled in my life. Wildfires, earthquakes, and the increasingly crowded Los Angeles metropolitan area make this option untenable for me. Second, I will need to live in a city that has high enough elevation to avoid flooding. Moving back to my hometown of Baltimore is not an option, as it has a mean elevation of 350 feet. Finally, I must choose an area that has the paradoxical criteria of being safe enough from flooding, but close enough to a water source. Based on all this criteria, arguably the worst place to live as the climate spirals out of control is Florida. It's already hot, it's close to the ocean, it has low elevation, and it is often struck by storms that will become even more frequent as the climate changes. Florida has little risk of drought, but that is about all it has going for it. So, where the heck am I gonna live? There are a few options. First, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Washington and Oregon both get good precipitation, eliminating the problem of water shortage. I'm no meteorologist or climate scientist, but based on everything I have read, it is too rainy for significant droughts, moderate enough in temperature most of the time that an increase won't be too bad, and though both states have coasts, Washington and Oregon also have a high mean elevation. Of the cities in the area, Portland feels right for me. While much of the city is flat, there are mountains that run through the northwest and southwest reaches of the city. Portland receives higher than average precipitation, little snowfall each year, and it's not too far or too close to the ocean. A real Goldilocks area. In terms of culture, I think I would fit right in. There is a significant activist scene, like-minded anarchists. Two problems exist though. For one, Portland is very close to Mount Hood, a volcano. There is no reason to believe it will erupt anytime soon. The last eruption was in 1866, but that is the kind of thing that might make me anxious. For another, Portland meets the criteria so well that I suspect that the city will become crowded by the time I decide to move there. Everyone is reading the same data I am. Portland is not particularly large for a big city. It's only 144 square miles. If Portland becomes a climate change destination, it might get packed fast. I could live in a small town nearby, or the suburbs, but I can't function in small towns and the suburbs creep me out. An alternative might be Seattle. Coffee shops, the Space Needle, tossed salad and scrambled eggs and all that, but it depends on how well the city will prepare for the rising sea levels. The ocean is right there. Now moving away from the Pacific Northwest, a completely different option is New England. Drought, heat waves, wildfires, and hurricanes are rare there. The drawback has less to do with climate and more to do with personal preference. I don't want to live in Bridgeport, Connecticut or Providence, Rhode Island for the rest of my life. Don't get me wrong, they both seem like absolutely lovely places to live, but they don't exactly sound exciting. I'm sure Manchester, New Hampshire sounds like absolute heaven, but I guess I've been spoiled by the excitement of living in big cities where big things happen. So in New England, that leaves me with Boston. At a glance, it would seem that Boston would not even make the list of habitable cities as climate change gets worse. After all, it's so close to the ocean. But it looks like Boston city planners have been really proactive in their climate change preparations. They have plans to elevate roads, put marshes in to absorb flooding, and reinforce the wharf. Boston is ready. I guess I can see living there. It's a little weird that among my top choices are places where Dr. Fraser Crane lived, but okay. The only other option appears to be certain parts of the Midwest, especially Minnesota. Minneapolis could be my kind of town, and I do have friends there, but it is not at the top of the list. Preparing for climate change always feels disappointing, because it shouldn't have come to this. I shouldn't have to add concerns about heat waves and floods to my plans on which Fraser city I want to retire in. In the 1970s, when whistleblowers were warning us and scientists were testifying to Congress, that should have been when the world, or at least the United States, started taking this seriously. It's an uphill battle because we have one party that does not want to do anything about climate change and another party that wants to do something, but not enough. Oh well, I'll see you in Portland.